The year was settling into its tracks, heading toward 1876. The New Mexico territory was less a place to live and more a place to endure. At noon, the sun was not a friendly star. It was a white, hot eye that bleached the sky and demanded obedience. In this glare, Clara McKee stood framed in the doorway of her cabin. The wood of the cabin was dark, heavy, hauled from mountains she could not see, and it sat stubbornly by the dry, pale scar of a creek bed. She was a widow. Her skin spoke of her Irish-American heritage, fair and quick to burn, but the sun had tightened it, dried it like old leather. She lived in a silence so profound that the buzz of a single fly was an intrusion. Her nearest neighbor, if he could be called that, was a half-day's ride to the south, and she had not seen him in 3 months. She did not mind. The company she kept was her own thoughts, 6 nervous chickens, and 1 billy goat whose only purpose seemed to be eating things he should not. She survived on the eggs, the goat's milk which she soured into a passable cheese, and the few vegetables she coaxed from the cracked earth behind her home. What else she needed? She got by barter. This land was a trial. It tested the body and wore down the soul. The wind was the true voice of the territory, a constant, whining complaint that carried grit. The grit was not soft dust, it was sharp, alkaline, and it felt like salt being rubbed into the skin. It found its way under her collar, into her food, between her teeth. It made the air taste of minerals and endings. Here, law was a concept as distant as the green fields of Ireland her parents had spoken of. The territory was too vast, too empty, for judges and marshals. Law was a luxury. What they had instead was power. Power came from a fast horse, a repeating rifle, and a willingness to use it. The strong did what they would, and the weak did what they were told. A posse was not a force for justice. It was just a larger gang. Clara knew the names that defined this landscape of power. When she rode the 20 miles into the settlement, it was too mean and scattered to be called a town. She heard them. Maka. The name was spoken with a careful lowering of the voice. He was a Comanche leader, a man of seasons, his face rumored to be a map of the very land he fought for. They said he was iron, that his word was unbreakable. If Maka said you would live, you lived. If he said you would die, you died. This made him terrifying, but it also made him understand. Settlers feared him, but they also held a strange, grudging respect for a man who lived by a code they could not break. Koa. This name was newer, spoken with less certainty. A young warrior, maybe Maka's own blood, maybe just his favored student. The name was Shadow and Speed. Koa was the sudden raid, the impossible escape. He was the present danger, where Maka was the abiding one. Then there was the name that was not Comanche, the one that made Clara's stomach tighten. Tucker. Tucker led a posse. He wore a tin star, but no one knew who had given it to him. He was a thick, loud man who seemed to thrive on the heat and the dust. He and his half-dozen riders claimed they were hunting rustlers and protecting settlers. But Clara had seen them at work. She had seen them ride into the settlement, drink whiskey on another man's credit, and intimidate the blacksmith into shoeing their horses for free. Tucker did not stop chaos. He farmed it. He used the fear of the Comanche as a plow to break open the lives of settlers, taking what he wanted in the name of protection. He was building his own authority, 1 bullet and 1 threat at a time. Clara understood men like Tucker because she had lived through the consequences of their pride. Her husband, Liam, had been dead for 2 years. He had been a good man, a quiet man, who believed in hard work and minding his own business. His death had been a stupid, pointless waste, a stray bullet from a drunken argument between 2 cattle outfits, neither of which he belonged to, had found him as he was loading their wagon. After she had buried him, in the dry ground that resisted the shovel, the men had come to her. They were full of anger and whiskey. They drew lines in the dust with their boots. "They killed him," one had said, spitting tobacco. You are with us now. Clara, we will get justice for Liam." Clara had looked at their red, sweating faces, at the self-righteous anger that burned in their eyes. She knew justice was just a word they used for revenge. She knew that Liam, who had not even been part of their quarrel, was now just an excuse for more shooting. In that moment, her belief in us and them had fractured like a dry piece of wood. She saw two sides of the same worthless coin. "I am not with anyone," she had told them, her voice flat. "I am just with him." She had left the next day. She sold their small claim near the settlement and used the money to buy this piece of isolation, this cabin by a dry creek. She had chosen freedom. She had chosen her own conscience, a quiet and demanding companion, over the loud, easy comfort of a faction. Her life now was a set of repeating tasks, a liturgy against the wilderness. Wake before the sun, check the snares, milk the goat, collect the eggs, mend the fence where the wind had worried it loose. But the most important ritual, the one that held her life together, was the journey for water. Water was her second religion. Every morning, with the air still cool and sharp, she would take the two heavy wooden buckets and her rifle, and she would walk the half-mile along the dry creek bed to the spring. It was not a gushing fountain. It was a slow, patient trickle that emerged from a fissure in a tall rock, dripping into a stone basin that she herself had deepened. It took 15 minutes for the water to fill the first bucket, 15 minutes for the second. She would wait, listening to the drip, guarding it. This water was everything. It was the difference between life and death, but it was also the difference between dignity and despair. It was the water that washed the alkaline dust from her face at night. It was the water that boiled the hard beans until they were soft. It was the steam that rose from a tin cup of tea, a small comfort against the immense, crushing loneliness of the land. To be clean, to drink freely, was an act of defiance. The tension in the territory was growing. She could feel it. The settlement was a nerve center of this fear. When she rode in for flour and salt, she heard the talk. It always centered on the Comanche. A wagon train hit, though no one had seen the bodies. Livestock missing, though it could just as easily have been wolves or Tucker's own men. The words raid and massacre were used easily, and always. The simmering resentment, the talk of a blood debt that had to be paid. The anger was a dry brush, waiting for a spark. Clara stayed on the edges of this talk. She was the widow who lived alone, the woman who had refused to take sides. It made them distrust her. She would trade her cheese and eggs with the storekeeper, who measured out her goods with a silent, judging eye. She saw the world through her own lens, a view sharpened by loss. She felt the heat on her skin, smelled the acrid mix of horse sweat, tobacco, and fear. She heard the way men's voices became too loud when they were afraid. She saw the land in its harsh realities, the blinding light of noon, the life-saving shadow of a rock, the thin, honest plume of smoke from her own chimney. The last time she was in the settlement, a new story had cut through the usual noise. It was not about raids. It was quieter, more specific, and somehow more dangerous. A freighter, a man whose name she did not know, was talking to the blacksmith. He kept his voice low, but Clara, waiting for her sack of flour, caught the words. He spoke of a hunt, not for cattle, not for a raiding party, for a single man. A Comanche trader, the freighter whispered. This man, this Comanche, was said to have broken from his own people. He was running, and he was carrying something that proved ownership. The freighter mentioned a map, or a treaty paper, or some kind of marker. The blacksmith had looked up, his hammer still. "What kind of proof?" the blacksmith had asked. The freighter leaned closer. "Proof that the land the railroad wants," he breathed, "is not the land they are paying for." Clara froze. The railroad. That was the great rumor that underpinned everything. A line of iron and steam that would change the territory forever. It meant towns. It meant soldiers. It meant the end of the open range and the Comanche. It also meant that the land along its path would be worth a fortune. The freighter said this traitor was trying to get this proof to someone, to stop the deal or expose the lie. And there were men, white men, who were being paid a high price to find him, to get the object, and to make sure the Comanche was never seen again. Clara paid for her flour and left. She loaded her wagon, her mind racing. This was not about old hatreds. This was not a blood debt. This was about greed. This was about the future, about the lines men would draw on a map to make themselves rich. That, she knew, was the most dangerous, most desperate kind of hunt. It was a fire that would burn everything in its path, and it was coming her way. The rumor of the railroad was a dry heat at her back, but the morning ritual was a necessity that anchored her. The sun was an hour high, promising another day of punishment. When Clara left the cabin, she carried the 2 empty buckets, their wooden handles smooth and familiar in her grip. Her rifle was balanced lightly in her other hand. She walked the path along the creek bed. It was not a path of her making, but one worn by deer and coyote, and now by her. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of her boots on the gravel and the high, thin cry of a hawk circling in the white sky. She reached the spring, a dark, damp stain against a tall slab of limestone. The water dripped, slow and steady, a sound like a clock ticking in a quiet room. She set one bucket beneath the trickle and stood, scanning the rim of the canyon, her eyes tracing the familiar lines of rock and thorny brush. It was then she saw it, down in the deepest part of the crutch, where the last flood had scoured the earth. There was a shape. It was a heap of dark rags, unmoving. Her first thought was a calf, maybe one of the wild ones, dead from thirst, or a coyote, caught in a trap he had dragged for miles. Death was common currency here. She kept her rifle ready. She walked closer, her steps slow. The shape was too large for a coyote. As she approached, a new smell cut through the clean scent of dust and morning air. It was a thick, coppery smell, old blood. It was not an animal. It was a man, lying face down. His dark hair was matted with burrs and dried mud. He wore buckskin leggings and no shirt. His skin was the color of burnished copper. A Comanche. Clara stopped, her breath held tight in her chest. This was the enemy. This was the shadow that fueled Tucker's power and the settlement's fear. She nudged his boot with the toe of her own. He did not move. She nudged him harder, at the hip. A sound escaped him. It was not a word, just a low groan, a release of air so painful it sounded like a man being torn in two. He was alive. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She looked around, wildly. The landscape was empty. She was alone. She could walk away. She could go back to the spring, fill her buckets, and go home. By nightfall, the buzzards would have found him. By tomorrow, he will be gone. It would be the smart thing to do. It would be the safe thing to do. She cursed, a short, sharp word that the wind took. She could not. She laid her rifle on a flat rock, knelt, and put her hands on his shoulder. With a grunt, she pulled, rolling him onto his back. His face was slack, his eyes closed. Dried blood was caked at the corner of his mouth, but it was the wound on his leg that seized her attention. A broken arrow shaft jutted from his upper thigh. It was high up, near the groin. A terrible place. The wood was dark, splintered. The flesh around it was not red, but a sick, swollen purple. The skin stretched tight and shiny. It looked hot, as if a coal were buried inside him. His buckskins were stiff with a black crust of blood. She touched the skin near the wound. It was burning. The fever was already on him. And the memory, sharp and unwanted, rose up and choked her. Liam. Liam in their small bed, his leg twice its normal size. The bullet had been clean, the doctor had said, but the bullet had carried a piece of his filthy work trousers into the wound. It was not the lead that killed him. It was the poison in the cloth. It was the infection. She remembered the smell, a sweet, rotten smell that signaled the body's surrender. She remembered his mind going, the rambling talk of green fields. She remembered the helplessness, the rage, the way the clean white sheets she boiled every day meant nothing against the sickness spreading beneath them. This man, this stranger, this enemy, was dying that same death, right now. The decision was not a thought. It was a physical reaction, a reflex against the memory of that waste. She would not watch it happen again. She was trying to figure out how to lift him when she heard the sound. It was not the hawk. It was the clink of a bridle chain, the heavy, rhythmic beat of shod horses on packed earth. Her blood went cold. She snatched up her rifle. They came over the low ridge to the east, 7 of them, dark shapes against the bright sky. They wore dusty hats and bandanas pulled up over their noses, as if they were already hanging. Their rifles were not in their scabbards. They were in their hands, resting across their saddles. Tucker was in the lead. He rode his big roan mare straight toward her, stopping only 10 feet away. He looked down, first at her, then at the Comanche on the ground. His eyes, small and pale above the bandana, crinkled at the corners. It might have been a smile. "Well now, Mistress McKee," he said, his voice muffled by the cloth. "Looks like you found some trouble, or it found you." He dismounted, his boots landing heavy. The other 6 men fanned out, creating a loose, silent semicircle. They were a wall of menace. "He is a killer," Tucker said. He motioned to the man on the ground with his rifle barrel. "That one is Koa. He backshot 2 of our men at Dry Creek, left them for the crows." Clara's hands tightened on her rifle. She knew the geography of this land. Dry Creek was 10 miles in the opposite direction of the settlement. Tucker would not have been there. It was a lie. It was a clean, simple lie to justify what was coming next. "We've been tracking him since sunup," Tucker went on, walking closer. "Looks like someone else put an arrow in him. Saves us the trouble. We are just here to finish it." He raised his rifle, leveling it at the unconscious man's head. "No!" The word was quiet, but it cut through the morning air. Tucker paused. He looked at her, his head tilted. "What did you say, ma'am?" "I said no." Clara took 1 step, placing herself between Tucker and the wounded man. She did not raise her rifle to aim, but she held it firm, across her chest, a barrier. "This is my land. Tucker." The men on their horses shifted. One of them laughed, a short, nervous bark. "This is my claim," Clara said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "That spring is on my property deed. This man is on my land. You raise a gun here. You are trespassing." She was invoking a law that barely existed, a piece of paper filed in a courthouse 100 miles away. But it was the only shield she had. She was setting a boundary, not just of dirt, but of principle. Tucker stared at her. His eyes were flat and cold. "Mistress McKee, are you telling me you are harboring this animal, a redskin murderer, that makes you a traitor to your own kind? That makes you no better than him." He took a step closer. She could smell the sour sweat from him, the tobacco on his breath. "Maybe we ought to take you in, too," he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "For aiding an enemy." The tension stretched thin, like a wire drawn too tight. It was 7 guns against her. It was a mob against a single conscience. Clara looked past Tucker, at the other men. She recognized one, a young man named Silas, the blacksmith's son. He would not meet her gaze. He was staring at his saddle horn. They were weak. They were just weak men following a bully. "He is a dying man," Clara said, her voice clear. "I will not let you shoot a dying man on my property. If you want to kill him, you will have to shoot me first." Silence. The wind whispered through the dry mesquite. The hawk cried out again, far above them. Tucker looked at her, at the raw certainty in her eyes. He saw she meant it. He hated her for it. He was a brute, but he was not stupid. Shooting a white widow in broad daylight, on her own claim, was a line even he was not ready to cross. Not yet. It would turn the settlement against him, and he needed their fear, not their outrage. He let out his breath in a long, frustrated hiss. He lowered his rifle. "He will be dead by morning anyway." Tucker spat, the words full of venom. "That leg is poisoned. You are wasting your charity, widow." He turned and swung himself back onto his mare. "This is not over," he called down to her. "You made your choice." He pointed a thick finger at her. "When he is dead, you burn him. If he is still breathing when we come back tomorrow, we will burn this whole cabin with both of you inside it." He yanked the mare's head around and kicked her flanks. The posse wheeled their horses. Following him, they rode back over the ridge, a pack of frustrated animals. The dust they raised hung in the air long after the sound of their hooves had faded. Clara stood, shaking, the adrenaline drained out of her, leaving her weak and sick. She was alone again, alone with the 2 empty buckets, the silent spring, and the man who was her responsibility, the man who had just become her death warrant. She looked down at him. His breathing was shallow. He was a heavy man, all muscle and bone. She was not strong, but she was stubborn. She laid down her rifle. She left the buckets. Water could wait. Her entire life had just been upended. "All right," she whispered to the unconscious man. "It seems we are in this together." She grabbed him under the armpits. He was a terrible, limp weight. She pulled. He did not budge. She tried again, bracing her feet, pulling with her whole body. He slid perhaps 2 inches. Her back screamed in protest. This was impossible. She stopped, breathing hard. She could not drag him. The rocks would tear him apart. She would have to carry him, or half carry him. She knelt, forced her shoulder under his armpit, and wrapped his heavy arm around her neck. She gathered all her strength, focused on the memory of Liam's coffin, and stood. The man's weight almost drove her back to her knees. He was much taller than her. His feet dragged, but he was up. She began to walk. Each step was an agony. Her lungs burned. The muscles in her legs quivered and threatened to buckle. He was a dead weight, shifting and pulling her off balance. She gasped, the air hot and dusty in her throat. The half-mile to her cabin became a desert, an impossible distance. She fell once. Her knee struck a sharp rock, and she cried out. The man fell on top of her, crushing the air from her lungs. She lay there for a long minute, pinned, tears of pain and frustration blurring her vision. She thought of Tucker. She thought of his threat. She got angry. She wriggled out from under him. She got to her feet. She hauled him up again. "You will not die here," she hissed, as much to herself as to him. This was no longer about charity. This was about defiance. This was the weight of her choice, and she would carry it. When she finally reached the cabin, she was soaked in sweat, and her back felt broken. She did not take him inside. The cabin's floor was her first line of defense, near the stone chimney. She grabbed the iron ring set into the floorboards and pulled. 3 boards lifted up, revealing the dark, square hole of the root cellar. It was cool down there, and it smelled of damp earth, potatoes, and dried apples. It was the safest place. She did not climb down. She rolled him, letting him fall the 4 feet to the dirt floor below. He landed with a heavy, final thud. She replaced the floorboards and stumbled into the cabin. First, the stove. She fed it kindling, the movements automatic. She filled the kettle from the small barrel she kept inside and set it on to boil. Boil water. That was the first rule. From a locked chest under her bed, she took the bottle of whiskey. It was half full. She tore strips of cloth from her one good linen sheet, the one she had brought from back east. She lit the lantern, her hands trembling. She pulled up the floorboards again and climbed down the short ladder into the darkness. He lay as he had fallen, a heap of limbs. The lantern light threw grotesque shadows on the earthen walls. She knelt beside him. She had to see the wound clearly. The broken arrow shaft was a stark, ugly thing. She could not pull it. She knew that much. The arrowhead, likely a piece of sharpened flint or iron, was buried deep. To pull it would be to tear the artery, and he would bleed to death in minutes. All she could do was fight the poison. She uncorked the whiskey. "I am sorry," she whispered. She poured the amber liquid directly onto the swollen, purple flesh. His body arched off the floor. A sound was torn from his throat, a deep, guttural cry of agony that was half scream, half roar. His eyes flew open, black and wild, but they saw nothing. He was deep in the delirium. "Hold on," she said, pressing her hand on his chest to keep him from thrashing. "Hold on!" He fought her, his strength surprising, but the fever had already weakened him. She poured more whiskey, washing away the dirt and grime. The smell of it, sharp and clean, filled the small space. He fell back, unconscious again. She took the clean linen strips. She soaked them in the remaining whiskey, carefully, wincing as she touched the hot skin. She packed the rags tightly around the arrow shaft, sealing the wound from the air. She wrapped another strip around his thigh to hold the packing in place. It was crude. The breathing from the cellar had not stopped. It was the same, low groan. But the silence outside had changed. It was no longer empty. It was full. It was the silence of held breath. She rose, her joints stiff, every muscle screaming in protest. She moved to the window, her stockinged feet making no sound on the floorboards. She pulled the edge of the calico curtain back a fraction of an inch. Her blood turned to ice. They were not Tucker's men. This was not a posse. This was a war party. They had come without a sound, ghosts in the morning mist. They formed a perfect, wide half-circle, facing the cabin, their line extending from the dry creek bed to the low ridge of juniper. They sat on their ponies, which stood as still as the rocks around them, their heads low. The riders were dark, unmoving shapes. She counted 13, and then 2 more near the ridge. Sentries. 15. They held bows, lances, and rifles, but held them in a state of rest. They were not attacking. They were watching. Comanche. She let the curtain fall, her hand trembling. The trap had closed. All her defiance against Tucker, all her desperate work in the cellar, had been for nothing. She had saved this man from a quick, disorganized murder only to deliver him and herself to a disciplined, patient, and absolute force. She looked at her rifle. She looked at the heavy bar across the door. There was no defense. Hiding was pointless. Running was impossible. Her fear was a cold, sharp thing, but it was quickly replaced by a familiar, stubborn anger. She would not die hiding in a box, listening to them tear it apart. She would not die cowering. She checked the load in her rifle. She pulled on her boots. She walked to the door and, with a single, loud scrape, lifted the heavy wooden bar. She opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. The cold morning air felt like a slap. It was clean and sharp, and it cleared her head. One rider separated himself from the line. He did not urge his horse to a trot. He moved it forward at a slow, deliberate walk, as if he had all the time in the world, as if the sun itself waited for his command. The pony, a spotted Appaloosa, moved with a fluid, ground-eating gait, its hooves making almost no sound on the packed earth. He stopped about 20 yards from her. It was not a hostile distance, but it was not a friendly one. It was a distance of judgment. This was not a young warrior. This was the man she had heard whispering about. This was Maka. He was older, perhaps 50 years, perhaps more. Time had carved him. His face was a landscape of deep lines, his skin the color of dark, oiled leather. His hair was long. black threaded with gray, bound in two thick braids. He wore no paint, only a simple buckskin breechcloth and leggings. A heavy buffalo robe was draped over his shoulders against the morning chill. He held a feathered lance, its iron head pointing at the sky, and he held it with the casual ease of a man holding a walking stick. But his eyes were the oldest part of him. They were narrow, black, and sharp, and they seemed to see right through the wood of the cabin, through her skin, and into the desperate, fearful beating of her heart. Clara stood on the porch. She was 3 feet above him, but she felt as if she were at the bottom of a well. She held her rifle across her body, her hands gripping the stock and barrel. It was not aimed. It was a statement. "This is mine. I do not surrender." Maka's gaze moved over her. It was slow, appraising. He looked at her worn dress, at her bare hands, at the rifle she held. Then his eyes scanned the cabin. He noted the closed shutter, the chimney with no smoke, the unbarred door. His gaze dropped to the ground by the porch. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that he could read the story written there. He saw the cluster of boot prints and shod hoof tracks from Tucker's posse. He saw the deep grooves in the dirt where she had dragged the wounded man, the scuff marks of her own desperation. He knew. He spoke. His voice was not loud, but it was deep, a rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself. It carried in the still air as if he were standing next to her. "You have a man," he said. It was not a question. "I do," Clara answered. Her voice was thin, reedy. She cleared her throat. "I do." "He is Comanche," Maka stated. "He is Koa." I did not know his name until he spoke it. She said, "We tracked the white men," Maka said. He guessed it with his chin toward the ridge where Tucker had appeared. "They hunted him. They left him for dead. We found their tracks, and then we found yours." His eyes fixed on hers. "You brought him here." "He was dying," Clara said, her voice finding its strength. "He is still dying. There is an arrow in his leg. The poison is in him." A warrior behind Maka, a younger man with a face tight with anger, shouted something in his own language. His hand tightened on the rifle across his lap. Maka did not turn his head. He did not look at the man. He simply raised his left hand, palm backward, a movement of 2 inches. The young warrior fell instantly silent. The discipline was absolute. Clara braced herself. This was it, the demand. "Give him to us, or we will take him, and we will kill you for touching him." Maka looked at her for a long, silent moment. She felt as if she were being weighed, her spirit measured on a scale. She did not look away. She would not. Then he spoke the words that changed everything. "We will wait." Clara stared, her mind unable to process the words. They made no sense in the logic of this world. Tucker would have started shooting. "Wait for what?" she asked, her voice betraying her confusion. "He is a warrior," Maka said, his voice flat, as if explaining a simple truth to a child. "He is not a piece of meat. He is not a prisoner to be taken. He was on a mission for the people." Maka paused, and his eyes seemed to grow even sharper. "He speaks for himself. We will wait for him to speak. We will let him choose." This was a code of honor so far beyond Tucker's brute force that it left her staggered. It was the great twist. They were not here to destroy. They were here to bear witness. "He cannot speak," Clara said, a new desperation rising in her. This was a worse sentence, a race against time. "He has a high fever. He's out of his mind. He may not live to see noon." "Then you will tend to him," Mecca said. "And you?" she asked. "We will be here." He turned his gaze, very slowly, toward the ridge to the east, the one Tucker had ridden over. "The white man, Tucker, he will return. He will bring more men. He believes he has won a prize." He knew Tucker. He knew the entire shape of the board. "When he comes," Maka said, "we will be here." He turned his pony, a single, fluid motion. It was a dismissal. The audience was over. He rode back to the line of warriors and dismounted. The others did the same, their movements economical, silent. They did not build fires. They did not make camp. They melted into the landscape of juniper and rock, taking up positions. They were no longer a line of warriors. They were a ring of judges, a silent court, waiting for a verdict that only the man in her cellar could give. Clara backed into the cabin and barred the door. She leaned against it, her body shaking. The tension of the last 2 days had been a sharp, clean fear. This was something new. This was a vice, tightening from 2 sides. Outside, 2 armies, one white, one Comanche, were preparing to fight a war over her cabin, and she was trapped in the middle. She was a traitor to Tucker's men, a criminal. To the Comanche, she was what? A jailer, a nurse, a suspect. They were watching her, waiting to see if she would murder their man, or save him. The situation was impossible. It was a 3-sided trap. A low groan came from beneath the floor. Koa. Everything, her life, the lives of the men outside, the very land, rested on the breath of one man in a dark hole. The tenuous agreement was clear. Though it had never been spoken, she was to keep Koa alive. If he woke, if he could speak, he would choose. If he chose to go with them, she would not stop him. If he chose to stay, they would listen. Her only way out was through him. She pushed herself off the door. She had work to do. She pulled the heavy iron ring on the trap door. The boards lifted. A wave of heat and the thick, sour, sweet smell of sickness rose from the darkness. It was the smell she remembered, the smell of Liam's last days. She lit the lantern. Her hand was steady now. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp purpose. She climbed down the ladder into the stifling dark. He was worse. The dim lantern light was merciless. He was no longer just muttering. He was thrashing, his powerful body twisting on the hard-packed earth, fighting unseen demons. The fever had him completely. He was drenched in sweat, his skin burning. She looked at the wound. The linen strips she had packed around the arrow were soaked with a foul, watery discharge. The skin of his thigh was swollen to twice its size, a dark, angry purple, the flesh stretched tight and shiny. He would be dead in hours. "No," she said, her voice a low, hard command. "You will not." She climbed the ladder, brought down a bucket of fresh, cool water from the barrel, and more linen strips. She knelt beside him. She unwrapped the soiled bandages, wincing at the heat and the smell. She began to clean him, her motions brisk, efficient. She held him down with one hand, her own strength surprising her, while she bathed his face, his chest. He fought her. He shouted in his own language, words of war and fear. She kept working, and she kept talking. Her voice was the only other thing in the cellar, a low, steady counterpoint to his delirium. "You have to fight," she told him, her voice fierce, as if she could force her will into him. "Your people are outside. They are waiting for you. Maka, he is waiting. You have to speak to him. You cannot die. I will not let you die." She found herself telling him, telling this delirious, dying stranger the things she had never told anyone. "My husband," she said, her voice catching, but she forced it steady. "He died. For nothing. He was a good man, but he got caught between them. 2 cattle outfits. Both of them so sure they were right. So sure the other side was wrong. They drew a line in the dust, and he was standing on it." She bathed his burning chest. He was quieting, his thrashing easing, as if the sound of her voice was a strange kind of medicine. "They came to me after. They wanted me to choose. You are with us now. They said they wanted revenge. They wanted to use his good name to justify more killing." She dipped the rag in the cool water and laid it on his forehead. I looked at their faces, their angry, righteous faces, and I saw they were no different from the men who shot him. They just needed an enemy. It makes them feel clean. It makes them feel right. "I left," she whispered. I came here. I do not believe in their sides. I do not believe anyone is entirely right. There is just what is right in front of you." She touched the hot, swollen leg. "There is just bleeding, and you have to stop it. That is all." She sat with him. The morning bled into the high, hot noon. The cabin above her was silent. The world outside was silent. The only reality was this dark, suffocating space, and the man's fight for breath. Sometime in the afternoon, the crisis came. His thrashing stopped. His body went completely, horribly rigid. His back arched, his hands clawing into fists. His eyes flew open, but they were white, rolled back. A long, shuddering sigh emptied his lungs, a sound of final surrender. And then he was still, utterly still. "No." Clara's heart stopped. She had seen this. This was the moment. This was the stillness that had taken Liam. She put her hand on his chest. Nothing. She leaned her ear to his mouth. No breath. "No," she breathed, tears of hot, pure rage blurring her vision. "Damn you! After all this, no!" A cough. It was not a cough. It was a deep, body-racking spasm that tore through him, as if he were being turned inside out. His body convulsed. He turned his head, and a thin stream of black bile and sickness emptied from his mouth onto the dirt floor. He took a breath. It was not a gasp. It was a deep, greedy, shuddering inhalation that filled his lungs. He could again. And then he lay back, his entire body trembling as if with an ague. Clara touched his forehead. The fire was gone. His skin was no longer burning. It was cool, clammy, and drenched in sweat. The fever had broken. She slumped against the earthen wall, her own body shaking with a relief so profound it felt like pain. She did not move for a long time. She just sat in the dark, listening to the sound of his breathing. It was ragged, wet, and terrible, but it was the sound of life. She must have dozed, her head against the cool dirt. When she opened her eyes, the lantern was sputtering, its oil burning low. He was watching her. His eyes were open. They were not wild. They were not blind. They were dark, sane, and filled with a bottomless, crushing exhaustion. But they were his. He was looking at her. She sat up straight, her heart pounding a new rhythm. They stared at each other in the dim, flickering light. The silence was absolute. He was assessing her. She was assessing him. He saw a woman, her hair stuck to her face with sweat and dirt, her dress stained, her eyes wide with fear and fatigue. She saw a man who had walked through the fire and came out the other side. He tried to speak. His voice was a dry, cracked whisper, a sound like dry leaves skittering on rock. "Water," he said. The word was English. Clara scrambled up the ladder, her legs unsteady. She pulled open the trap door. The cabin was filled with the orange light of late afternoon. She looked out the window. The silent circle of warriors was still there. She filled a tin cup from the water barrel by the stove, her hands shaking so badly she spilled half of it. She climbed back down. She knelt beside him. She slid her arm under his head, lifting him. Her hand cupped the back of his neck. His damp hair was matted with dirt. He was heavy, a dead weight, but a living one. She brought the cup to his lips. He drank. He drank with a desperation that was painful to watch, his throat working. He finished the entire cup, and she had to steady his head as he could. She gave him a second cup, and he drank it more slowly. His eyes closed. He sank back, his breath sighing out. He lay still, gathering what strength was left in him. He opened his eyes again. His gaze was steady, intense. He was measuring her, just as Maka had. "You," he whispered. The word an effort. "You are not one of them." "One of Tucker's men?" she asked softly. "White," he said, the word simple. "No," Clara said, understanding the question, the lifetime of war behind it. "I am not one of them." He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, the first fragile signal of trust. "My people," he whispered. "Outside." "Yes, 15 of them. Their leader, Maka. He is waiting for you. He said they will wait for you to speak, for you to choose." A flicker of deep, profound emotion passed through his eyes. It was not fear, it was awesome. "He honors me," he breathed. "He is protecting us," Clara said. "The white men, the posse, they will be back. Their leader, Tucker, he wants you dead. He told me you murdered 2 men at Dry Creek." A faint, grim smile touched Koa's cracked lips. "He lies. They hunted me, not for murder." "He will come back," she said, her voice urgent. "Yes." "Can you walk?" He tried to push himself up on one elbow. The movement sent a white-hot jolt of pain through him. He fell back, his face pale, a new sheen of sweat on his forehead. "No," he breathed, "the arrow." "I could not pull it," she said. "I was afraid it would kill you." "Good," he whispered. "The head is iron. To pull tears to the artery, I would be dead." He closed his eyes, and she thought he had fallen back asleep, but his eyes opened again, and his gaze was locked on hers. "Clara," he said. He had heard her speaking her own name, or perhaps Liam's. No, he was guessing. He was asking. "Yes," she said. "I am Clara." "I am Koa." They had named themselves. In the dark, beneath the earth, the first fragile thread of trust was spun. His request was simple, and it was impossible. "Needs fire, a sharp knife." He was asking her to cut him, to perform the crude, brutal surgery that she had failed to even think of, the kind of work a blacksmith might do on a horse. He was asking this of her, here in the dim, foul light of the cellar, while 2 armies waited outside. Clara's stomach turned, a cold knot of fear and nausea, but she looked at his eyes. They were steady. He was not just asking for help. He was trusting her with his life. A second time, he had decided she was capable of this, and in that moment, his faith became her own. "All right," she said, her voice a dry whisper. "Stay. Do not move. I will be back." She climbed the ladder, her legs shaking, and pulled the trap door shut. The cabin was filled with the heavy orange light of late afternoon. A silence hung over the world, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The Comanche circle was still there, unmoving, watching. She moved with a desperate, focused energy. Fire. She went to the stove, her hands automatically adding small sticks of kindling, striking the match. The flames caught a hungry, licking sound. She put the heavy iron kettle on to boil. Water. Her religion. A knife. She did not own a surgeon's tools. She had her kitchen knives, and she had the one good skinning knife Liam had kept sharp as a razor. She took it from its peg by the door. The blade was 6 inches long, curved and clean. She went back to the stove and, gripping the wooden handle, thrust the blade into the hottest part of the fire, where the wood was turning to white-hot coals. More bandages. She ripped the last of her good linen sheet. There was nothing left to tear up after this. Whiskey. She had used almost all of it. There was maybe 1 good swallow left in the bottle. It would not be enough to dull his pain. It would only be enough to clean the wound. She took the steaming kettle off the stove, poured the boiling water into a tin basin. She pulled the knife from the fire. The blade was no longer silver. It was glowing a dull, angry red. She gathered everything: the knife, the basin of water, the bandages, the bottle. She opened the trap door. The heat from the cellar hit her in the face. She climbed down, placing each item carefully on the packed dirt floor. Koa had not moved. He had watched her go, and he had waited. His eyes followed her, locking onto the knife. "The fever is broken," Clara said, her voice sounding strange and formal to her own ears. "But the poison from the arrowhead, the iron, is still in you. It will kill you if I do not get it out." He nodded. He understood. "This will hurt," she said, the understatement a grotesque thing. "I know," he whispered. "Give me the leather." He meant a strip of rawhide he used to tie his leggings. She found it, a thick, oiled strap. He did not ask her to put it in his mouth. He did not want to make a sound. He wrapped it, twice, around his own hand, and made a fist. He would silence his own scream in his own flesh. Clara set the lantern as close as she could. The wound was a nightmare. Swollen, purple, the flesh hot and tight. The broken arrow shaft was still there, the center of the infection. "I have to pull the shaft first," she said, her own voice trembling. "No, cut," he breathed, his eyes tight with pain. "Cut around it. The head is barbed. It will not pull." He was directing her. She took the knife. It was already cooling, losing its red glow. She took a deep breath. She placed the tip of the blade against his hot skin, an inch from the shaft. "Now," he hissed. She pressed down. She had skinned deer. She had cut up chickens. It was a small, flat piece of dark, rusted iron. It was about 4 inches long, and one side was perfectly straight. The other edges were jagged, as if it had been broken from a larger plate. There were markings on it, lines and scratches that looked like a map. They meant nothing to her, but she knew, with a cold certainty. This was it. This was the proof the freighter had talked about. This was the object that had brought Tucker and Micah to her door. This was the thing he was trying to protect. She slid it back into its leather pouch and retied it to his belt. It was his burden. She was just finishing when she heard it. The sound of shod horses, not the quiet, unshod ponies of the Comanche, the heavy, confident, iron sound of white men's horses. They were coming fast. A new panic seized her. She scrambled up the ladder, her legs aching, and slammed the trap door shut, dropping the bar across it. She ran to the stove, grabbing the empty pot. She threw the bloody arrowhead into the dying coals, where it hissed and disappeared. She threw the blood-soaked water from the basin out the back door, into the dust. She grabbed her rifle. She stepped onto the porch. Tucker was back. He had the same 6 men with him, but they were not relaxed. They were angry, their faces grim. They fanned out, but not in a casual way. They were a firing line. "I am done," Tucker yelled. His voice was raw. "I am done playing games with you, you redskin whore." The insult hit her like a slap. It was the word he had used to condemn her, to place her outside her own race. "I gave you your chance, Mistress McKee," he shouted. Dismounting, he walked toward the cabin, his hand on his pistol. "Now I am searching for this house. We are going to drag that murderer out, and we are going to hang him from your roof beam." "This is my land, Tucker," she cried, her voice high with exhaustion and rage. "You have no right." "I have the right of a rope," he snarled. "And I have the right of these men, who say you are a traitor. You are harboring an enemy." He took a step onto her porch. Clara raised her rifle, leveling it at his chest. "Get back," she said, her voice a low, dangerous command. Tucker froze. He smiled. A cold, ugly smile. "You would shoot me, widow for him." "I will shoot you," she said, her hand steady. "For trespassing." He was going to call her bluff. She could see it in his eyes. He was going to take one more step. His hand was already moving toward his gun. A shadow moved. It was not a sound. It was a change in the light, a shifting of the air. Tucker's smile vanished. His eyes went wide. He was not looking at her. He was looking just past her shoulder. Clara did not turn. She did not have to. From the rocks, from the junipers, from the dry creek bed, they rose. The Comanche had not left. They had been waiting. Micah sat on his pony, not 20 yards from Tucker's flank. The other 14 warriors were with him. A silent, unmoving line of brown skin, dark horses, and deadly intent. They had not made a sound. They were simply there. The posse froze. The young man, Silas, let out a small, terrified sound. The horses snorted, their ears flat, smelling the new, strange scent of the Comanche ponies. Tucker and his 6 men were caught. They were in the open, on a flat piece of ground, with their backs to a cabin and their faces to a war party. Maka said nothing. He simply sat, his feathered lance in his hand, and watched. Tucker turned his head, very slowly, to look at the Comanche leader. Then he looked at Clara, standing on the porch, her rifle still aimed at his heart. She was the middle line, she was the boundary, and he was standing on the wrong side of it. The silence stretched, thick and hot. It was a silence of 3 sides, a triangle of hate, and Clara was the fulcrum. Tucker was a bully, but he was not a fool. He could not fight 14 Comanche warriors. Not like this, not for this. He was humiliated. He was furious. He let out his breath, a long, ragged hiss. He took his hand off his pistol. He took a step back, off her porch. He spat in the dust by her feet. "This is not over," he hissed, his voice low and full of venom. "You made your bed, woman. You are on their side now." He pointed a thick finger at her. "When they are done with you, when they have used you and left you, we will be back. We will be back to pick up the scraps. We will see how you like being on the wrong side then." He turned, walked to his mare, and swung himself into the saddle. He did not look at Maka. "Let's ride," he growled to his men. They did not need to be told twice. They wheeled their horses, kicking up dust, a frantic, disorganized retreat. They rode back over the ridge, the sound of their shod horses a frantic hammering, and then they were gone. The dust settled. Clara stood on the porch, her rifle lowering, her body shaking so hard she had to grip the railing. Maka watched her. He had seen everything. He had seen her stand him down. He had seen Tucker's rage and his retreat. He looked at her for a long, unblinking moment. It was not a look of thanks. It was not a look of approval. It was a look of pure, hard assessment. He gave a single, slow nod. Then, as silently as they had appeared, he and his warriors turned their ponies and melted back into the cover of the junipers, returning to their watchful circle. That night, the cabin was a fortress of light in the vast, dangerous dark. Clara lit the oil lamp, the small, steady flame a comfort against the shadows. She went down to the cellar. Koa was awake. He was pale, his face slick with sweat, but his eyes were clear. The pain was etched into his face, but the lucidity was back. She had made a thin broth. She fed it to him, spoon by spoon. Lifting his head, he drank it. She checked the bandage. It was clean. The bleeding had stopped. The angry purple was already receding. "Tucker came back," she said, her voice quiet in the small space. He nodded, his eyes closed. "I heard the shout." He opened his eyes. "I heard the scream." "I am sorry," she whispered, thinking of the pain she had caused him. "No," he said, his voice a rasp. "You saved me again." He paused, breathing through the pain. "Maka, he was here." "He was," she said. He stopped them. "He owes you," Koa whispered. "I owe you." "This is not about owing," Clara said, the words sharp. She sat back on her heels. "I am tired of men and their debts, their sides, their revenge. This is just about stopping the bleeding." He looked at her, his dark eyes intense, searching her face in the lamplight. "Honor," he said, the word a breath. "It is an honor." He did not mean his honor. He meant hers, in that small, dark hole, surrounded by enemies. They were no longer a white woman and a Comanche. They were 2 people, allied. The dawn came cold and clear. Clara had slept for an hour, fully clothed, in her chair. She woke to the sound of a single horse. She went to the porch. It was Maka. He dismounted and walked toward her. He did not stop at the 20-yard line. He walked right up to her porch, stopping at the steps.
"He is alive," Maka said. "It was a statement."
"He is," Clara said. "You cut him. You took the iron out." She was stunned.
"How did you know?"
"I heard him," Maka said simply. "The pain of a warrior. And I saw the white men run. They came for a wounded man. They did not get him." He looked at her, his black eyes unblinking. "You did this. You stood against your own. Now they will hunt you. Your people will not forgive you for this. They will call you a traitor. They will burn your home." It was a test. He was laying out her future, the one she had chosen. Clara thought of Liam. She thought of the men in the settlement demanding she join their cause. She thought of Tucker's spittle in the dust. "I do not belong to them," she said, her voice clear and hard. "I do not belong to you. I am my own. I chose to keep a man alive. That is all the side I have." Maka stared at her for a long time. The corners of his eyes crinkled. It was not a smile. It was something deeper. Respect.
"He is right,"
Maka said, more to himself than to her. "She has honor." He turned. "The white men will gather more. They will come back. They will come for him. And for you." He looked at her. "One more day. That is what I give. Koa must be strong enough to ride by tomorrow's light. If he cannot, we all die here, on your land." He reached into a pouch at his own belt and pulled out a small, dried bundle of leaves. "Boil this," he said, tossing it to her.
"For the wound. It stops the poison."
He turned, mounted his pony, and rode back to the circle, leaving her alone on the porch with the ticking clock. One day, Maka's bundle of herbs was small and dry, but when Clara dropped it into the pot of boiling water, the steam that rose was sharp and clean. It smelled of pine and sage and the high, cold air of the mountains. It was a scent of health, and it cut through the stale air of fear and sickness in her cabin. She let it steep, the water turning a dark, clear green. She strained it into a tin cup and carried it, along with the damp, warm leaves of the poultice, down into the cellar. Koa was where she had left him, but he was not resting. He was trying to sit up, his back braced against the earthen wall, his face a pale mask of sweat. The pain from the open wound was a living thing, and he was fighting it.
"He said to boil this,"
Clara said, her voice quiet. She knelt beside him.
"To drink, and the leaves for the wound."
He nodded, his jaw tight. He took the cup in a shaky hand and drank, his throat working. He drank it all, though she could see the effort it cost him. "Now," she said, "I have to change the bandage." He braced himself. "I am ready." She unwrapped the binding she had put on him after the cutting. The wound was raw, a clean, red gape in his flesh, but it was not oozing. The angry purple color had faded. Her brutal surgery and the broken fever had done their work. She took the warm, wet leaves from the bowl and laid them gently over the cut. His body went rigid. A low hiss of pain escaped his teeth. He squeezed his eyes shut.
"Breathe,"
she said, her voice soft but firm.
"Do not fight it. Just breathe through it."
He was panting, his breaths shallow and fast, like a cornered animal.
"No,"
she said. She put her hand on his bare shoulder. His skin was cool and damp. It was the first time she had touched him, not in violence or desperation. It was a touch of pure function, of instruction. "Like this, slowly, breathe with me." She took a slow, deep breath, in through her nose, and let it out. "Now you—" He tried. His breath hitched, but he tried.
"Again,"
she commanded gently. "Slow, in, out." She held her hand on his shoulder, and she felt the knot of his muscles, tight as coiled rope. She felt the tremor that ran through his entire body. They stayed that way for a long minute. Just the two of them in the dim, earthy light of the cellar. A shared rhythm of breath against the sharp, clean smell of the herbs. It was a moment of profound, wordless intimacy, forged in pain and respect. He was not her enemy. He was not her savior. He was a man, and he was letting her guide him. When the spasm passed, he let his head fall back against the wall, his breathing evening out. She finished bandaging the poultice in place. Her hand brushed the leather pouch at his belt, the hard, flat shape of the iron map.
"What is it?"
she asked, her voice low.
"The thing Tucker wants, the thing you were carrying."
He was quiet for a long time. His eyes were closed. She thought he might have slipped back into unconsciousness. "A marker," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "From the first men, the ones who measured the land, before." He fumbled with the pouch, his fingers weak. She helped him. He pulled out the dark, rusted piece of iron. In the steady light of the lantern, she saw it clearly for the first time. The markings were not scratches. They were lines, etched deep, and there were symbols, a shape like 3 stacked stones, a drawing of a fork in a river, a small, perfect circle. Clara's blood went cold. "I know these," she whispered, her finger tracing the lines.
"I know this. This is Three Sisters Rock.
And this is the dry fork at Salado Creek. And this circle," she looked up at him, her eyes wide with a terrible, dawning comprehension. "This is the old Spanish well. This is the Miller Ranch. This is the widow Jensen's claim." "Yes," Koa said, his voice stronger now, fueled by a cold anger. "They are landmarks, the land given to my people, by the ones before you, an old Spanish grant. The paper is dust, but the iron remains."
"The Millers,"
Clara said, her mind racing, fitting the pieces together. "Tucker said they were hit by a Comanche raid. He said you killed their livestock. They fled. They sold their land to the trading company for pennies." "We did not raid them," Koa said, his voice hard. "They were good people. They left water for us."
"And the widow Jensen,"
Clara continued, her voice shaking.
"Her barn was burned. Tucker said it was your people. He escorted her to the settlement for her own safety. She sold her claim, too, to the same company."
His men set the fire. Koa whispered,
"I saw the smoke. We found their tracks. Shod horses."
Clara sat back on her heels, the iron plate heavy in her hand. The full, monstrous truth settled on her. Tucker was not protecting the settlers. He was terrorizing them. He was manufacturing Comanche raids to clear the land, to buy it up for nothing.
"The railroad,"
she breathed. Koa nodded. "The Iron Horse, it comes. This map proves this land is not his, not the company's. It belongs to the people, or to the Millers. He is stealing it." "You were trying to show someone," she said.
"A man in the settlement,"
Koa said, his eyes closing in weariness.
"A man of God, a preacher. He reads the books. He said he would speak the truth. He promised to testify."
A weak man, Clara thought. A man who would promise, but who would break under pressure. "They were waiting for me," Koa said, his voice fading. "At the creek, Tucker's men, they shot my horse. I ran. The arrow was not from them. It was from another, a hunter maybe." He was exhausted. Clara understood everything. Tucker needed Koa dead, not for revenge, not for murder, but to silence him, to destroy this piece of iron, this one stubborn piece of truth that stood in the way of a fortune. And now, he needed her dead, too. She was the witness. She was the one who had stopped him, who had stood by the Comanche. She was a traitor. She placed the iron map back in its pouch and tied it to his belt. She covered him with the rough blanket.
"Rest,"
she said. "You must rest now." She climbed the ladder and barred the trap door, her mind a cold, clear engine. The game was no longer about survival. It was about truth. The rest of that day was a long,
tense quiet. The Comanche circle remained. They were a silent, protective wall. As evening fell, Clara saw one of the warriors, young and fast, dart from the trees. He ran to the edge of the clearing, placed something on a flat rock, and vanished back into the shadows. After a long time, Clara went out. It was a rabbit, skinned and cleaned. They were providing for her, protecting her. This was the silent, non-verbal message. You are with us because you are with him. She roasted the meat, the smell filling her small cabin. She made a thick broth and took it down to Koa. He ate, his strength slowly returning. That night, she did not sit in the chair. She lay on her cot, fully clothed, but she could not sleep. She listened to the night sounds. She heard the faint, distant call of an owl, and, much later, the high, thin scream of a coyote. But from the Comanche, there was nothing. They hunted in the dark, shadows guarding shadows. The dawn of the last day broke, cold and gray. Maka had given them until this light. Clara was standing on the porch, her rifle in her hand. When she heard the single horse, it was not Maka. It was the young, angry warrior who had shouted at her the day before. He rode up, his face a mask of urgent fury. He stopped at the 20-yard mark. He spoke, not to her, but at her, the words in his own language, sharp and guttural. He does not speak English, Koa's voice said from behind her. Clara turned. He was at the top of the ladder, leaning against the trapdoor frame. He had pulled himself up. He was pale, soaked in sweat, but he was standing. He listened to the young warrior, and his own face darkened. He replied in Comanche, a single, sharp question. The warrior answered, his voice full of venom, and he gestured back toward the settlement. "What is it?" Clara asked. Koa looked at her, and his eyes were full of a new, cold fire. "Tucker, he is not just a bully. He is smart." "What did he do?" "He rode to the settlement. He is not coming back with his posse." Koa leaned against the doorframe, gathering his strength. "He is telling them a new story. He is telling them I am not just a murderer. I am a war leader. That this," he motioned to the silent circle of warriors, "this is an attack. He is gathering all the men in the town." Clara's heart stopped. "And you," Koa said, his voice dropping. "He is telling them about you, that you are my woman, that you betrayed your people, that you sleep with the enemy." The social weapon, the final, filthy lie. He had destroyed her name. He was not coming back with 7 men. He was coming back with 20. He was not coming to arrest them. He was coming to lynch them. As if summoned, Mecca appeared. He rode up, his face grim. He looked at Koa, standing in the doorway, and then at Clara. He spoke, his voice flat. "He can stand. Can he ride?" "I will ride," Koa said. "Good," Maka said. "They will be here by noon. With many guns, we leave now. If we stay, the ground will drink blood." This was the final decision. The clock had run out. Clara looked around her small cabin. She looked at the stone hearth she had built with her own hands. She looked at the small rocking chair Liam had made, the one she sat in every night. She saw the dried herbs hanging from the rafters, the clean swept floor. It was her home. It was her life, the one she had carved out of the dust and the rock. And it was gone. Tucker had taken it from her. Not with a torch, but with a word. He had poisoned it. If she stayed, she would be murdered by the very people she had once tried to live beside. Her own kind had betrayed her. She looked at her home, at the memories hanging in the air like dust motes. A person, she thought, does not belong to a place. A place can be taken. A person belongs to their choices. She turned her back to the cabin. She looked at Koa, who was steadying himself against the doorframe, his hand gripping the iron map at his belt. "Where," she asked, "is my horse?" There was no time. Maka's words, "We leave now," hung in the air, but they were already a second too late.
The young warrior who had brought the news let out a sharp, guttural cry and pointed to the eastern ridge. "They come!"
It was not a posse, it was an army.
They streamed over the ridge, not in a neat line, but in a chaotic, angry flood. Clara counted 10, then 15, then 20 or more. They were not just Tucker's men. These were faces from the settlement, the blacksmith's son. Silas, his face pale and sick. The storekeeper, his hat pulled low. Farmers and ranchers she recognized. Men who had nodded to her in passing. Tucker had done his work. He had gathered the fear and righteousness of the entire valley and aimed it at her cabin. Tucker was at their head, his face a mask of triumph. He had a new shining star pinned to his vest. He had made himself the law. "Inside!" Maka roared. It was not a suggestion. Koa grabbed Clara's arm, his grip surprisingly strong, and pulled her back into the cabin. "The window," he gasped, hobbling, his face white with the strain. He collapsed onto the floor, his back against the wall, his rifle ready. The Comanche did not run, they did not retreat, they simply vanished. The circle of 15 warriors melted into the juniper and rock, disappearing as if the earth had swallowed them. Only Mecca remained visible, sitting on his pony in the open, a single, defiant statue. Tucker's army thundered into the clearing and pulled up a line of angry, sweating men and nervous horses. The dust they raised was a thick, choking cloud. "Clara McKee," Tucker's voice was a bellow of authority. "In the name of the New Mexico Territory, I am here to arrest the Comanche murderer Koa, and I am here to arrest you for treason and conspiring with the enemy." He held up a piece of paper.
"I have a warrant."
"He lies," Koa breathed from the floor. "It is just paper." Clara stood in the center of her small room, her world reduced to these few square feet. Her rifle was in her hand. "Maka," Tucker yelled, turning his horse to face the lone warrior. "This is white man's business. You leave now, and you live stay, and you will be buried with this whore." Maka did not move. He simply raised his feathered lance, held it level with his shoulder, and waited. It was his answer. "So be it," Tucker roared. "Light them up." But the first shot did not come from the line of men. It came from the rocks above. Crack! The sound was sharp, dry, and professional. A small, gray puff of smoke rose from the high ridge to the north. A sniper. The bullet struck the dirt a foot in front of Mecca's pony. It was a warning shot, a declaration of superiority. Maka did not flinch. He turned his head, his eyes scanning the rocks, locating the shooter. "A hired gun," Koa hissed, crawling toward the small window. "He is not one of them." The shot was the signal. The line of settlers, their courage bolstered by their numbers, let out a ragged yell and opened fire. The world exploded. A volley of lead tore into the front of the cabin. Bullets thudded into the thick logs, sending splinters of wood flying into the room. Clara's one window shattered, glass raining inward. "Down!" Koa yelled. He grabbed her dress and pulled her to the floor. She landed hard, the air knocked from her. Another volley hit, higher this time, tearing through her roof, ripping the dried herbs from the rafters. "My rifle!" Koa gasped. He fired a single, measured shot. From the window, a horse screamed. He could not move, but he could shoot. "Reload, my pouch." Clara, her heart hammering so hard it felt like a fist in her chest, crawled to him. His hands were steady, but he was weak. She took his empty rifle, her fingers fumbling with the cartridges in his belt. Load, eject, load. It was a rhythm. Outside, the chaos was a storm of noise. The posse was firing wildly. Their shots panicked, but the Comanche were a different kind of storm. They moved. They were not static targets. They were ghosts. A warrior would rise from behind a rock, fire twice, and be gone. Hand signals, almost invisible, directed their movements. They were like wind, impossible to catch, impossible to stop. The settlers, expecting a simple lynching, were now in a real fight. They were disorganized, terrified. Clara saw Micah. He was no longer in the open. He was riding hard along the line of trees, drawing their fire, a moving target of impossible bravery. The sniper fired again. The bullet kicked up dust near Mecca's horse. The sniper was good. He was toying with them. He was trying to kill the leader. "Give me," Koa breathed, his hand out. Clara slammed the reloaded rifle into his hand. He fired. He did not miss. She saw one of the settlers, a man she did not know, clutch his arm and fall back. "Again," Koa commanded. Clara grabbed her own rifle. Her home was being torn apart. Her life was over. All she had left was this fight. She crept to the shattered window. Next to him, the dust and smoke were so thick she could barely see. "The sniper," Koa said, pointing with his chin. "He pins Maka."
"I cannot see him,"
she panted, her eyes stinging. "Do not try," Koa said. "Shoot at them. Make them move." Clara rested her rifle on the splintered windowsill. She saw Silas, the blacksmith's son, huddled behind his horse, his face white. He was not even firing. He was just trying not to die. This was not a fight of good and evil. This was a fight of Tucker's greed against Micah's honor. And she was in the middle, her finger on a trigger. A new, frenzied yell cut through the din. One of Tucker's men, a big bearded man she had seen at the saloon, had lost his horse. He was on foot, his eyes wild with rage. He saw Koa in the window. "The murderer!" he screamed, his voice raw. "I see him. He is in the cabin." He raised his pistol and charged. A desperate, suicidal run. He was running right at the window, right at Koa. Koa tried to turn, to bring his rifle to bear, but he was too slow, pinned by the wound. Clara did not think. She acted. She swung her rifle, found the man's chest, and fired. She was a good shot. She hunted for her own meat, but she was not a killer. At the last second, her hand flinched, pulling the aim high. The bullet did not hit his chest. It tore his hat from his head, the force of it spinning him around. He stopped dead, his face a mask of sudden, shocked understanding. He had been 5 seconds from death, and the traitor, the whore, had been the one to spare him. He dropped his pistol and scrambled back into the dust, crawling for cover. Clara stared at her rifle. Her hands were shaking. She had done it. She had fired on her own people. She had chosen. There was no going back. A searing pain, a line of fire, tore across her left forearm. She cried out, dropping the rifle. She looked down. A bullet, or a piece of shrapnel from the window frame, had grazed her. Blood, dark and bright, welled up, running down to her elbow. Koa's voice was sharp. Before she could answer, he moved. He let go of his rifle. He forgot his own wound. He lunged, hissing in agony, and threw his body in front of her, shielding her from the window. He grabbed his own rifle, his left arm now wrapped around her, pulling her down. With his one free hand, he ejected the spent cartridge and fired, ejecting and firing, his movements a blur of practiced, calm violence. He was no longer a patient. He was a warrior. He was protecting her. "They are running," a voice cried from outside. It was Micah. The volley of fire from the posse had slackened. It was no longer a confident roar. It was a panicked, sporadic popping. Clara, pressed against Koa's chest, his heart hammering against her back, peeked over the sill. The settlers were in disarray. 2 men were down. 3 horses were running wild. This was not the lynching they had been promised. "Tucker!" one of them screamed. "Where is Tucker?" Tucker was not in the lead. He was behind a large boulder, his face no longer triumphant, but pale with fear. The sniper fired again. The bullet struck a rock near Maka, sending stone chips flying. Maka had had enough. He let out a high, piercing war cry. He pointed his lance, not at the posse, but at the sniper on the ridge. 2 Comanche warriors, who had been invisible until that moment, broke cover. They were on foot, running low, using the terrain, zigzagging up the ridge toward the sniper. The sniper saw them. He fired. He missed. He fired again. He missed again. He was a good shot at a stationary target, but he was not a warrior. He was panicking. Tucker saw his protection was being flanked. He saw his army disintegrating. "Hold the line!" he screamed, but his voice was thin. He rose from behind the boulder, raising his rifle to fire at the climbing Comanche. It was a mistake. Crack. It was not the sniper. It was Maka. He had fired from his pony, a single, perfect shot from 100 yards. Tucker screamed. He grabbed his right shoulder, his rifle clattering to the rocks. His arm hung limp, and a dark stain spread across his new, shiny star. He stared at his own blood, his face a mask of disbelief. The pain hit him, and his authority vanished. "I am hit," he cried, his voice a pathetic wail. "I am hit." That was all it took. The remaining settlers saw their leader fall. They saw the Comanche climbing the ridge. They saw Maka, reloading his face like stone. It was a rout. Silas, the blacksmith's son, was the first to run. He scrambled onto his horse and galloped away, not even looking back. The others followed. A mad scramble of fleeing men. They ran, their earlier righteousness forgotten, replaced by a primal, desperate need to escape. In 30 seconds, the clearing was empty. They left 2 of their own, unmoving in the dust. They left Tucker. He was on his knees, holding his shattered shoulder, his face gray with shock. He looked at the cabin, his eyes full of a new, different kind of hatred, a hatred born of humiliation. Maka rode his pony slowly into the clearing. He stopped in front of Tucker. He did not aim his rifle. He just looked down at the man. The sniper on the ridge had stopped firing. He was gone, having fled when he saw his employers run. Tucker scrambled to his feet, clutching his arm, and staggered to his horse. He hauled himself into the saddle, his face a grotesque mask of pain. He looked at Clara, who was now standing in the shattered window, her arm wrapped in a piece of her dress, her face smeared with soot. "This is not law," he panted, his voice a hoarse whisper. "This is murder. I will bring the army, the marshals. You will hang, all of you." He yanked his horse's head around and galloped away, a broken, defeated man, leaving his final threat hanging in the air. The silence that fell was more profound, more shocking than the gunfire. The clearing was a wreck. The dust was settling, revealing the pock-marked logs of her cabin, the shattered glass, the dark stains in the dirt. Clara's legs gave out. She sank to the floor, her whole body shaking, the adrenaline draining away, leaving her cold and sick. Her arm throbbed, a dull, stupid pain. She had survived. She felt a touch on her hair. Koa was leaning against the wall, his own face pale, but he was alive. He had not let go of her. He reached out with his good hand, his fingers trembling, and lightly touched her head. It was not a caress, it was a confirmation. "I am here, you are here, because of you." The trapdoor to the porch creaked. Maka stood there, silhouetted against the bright, cruel noon. He looked at the wreckage of her home. He looked at Koa, wounded but alive. He looked at Clara, bleeding but alive. He stepped inside, his eyes missing nothing. He saw the iron map, still tied to Koa's belt, now the clear and obvious center of the entire fight. "They will be back," Maka said, his voice flat. He was not talking about the posse. He looked at Clara. "He was right," Maka said. "They will not come back with a mob. They will come back with the law. They will come back with judges, dirty paper, and soldiers.
They will come for the map, and they will come for you. The sun was a smear of bloody orange in the west, pulling the last of the day's heat with it. The air grew cold, sharp with the smell of gunpowder, dust, and something coppery that was the blood drying in the dirt. The battle had been a storm, loud and violent, and the silence it left behind was heavier than any stone. Clara sat on the floor of her ruined cabin, her back against the splintered wall. Her home was full of holes, the logs pockmarked, the air moving freely through the new, jagged gaps. The wind, which had always been her enemy, now felt like a mourner, whistling softly through the wreckage. Her arm throbbed. The graze was a long, ugly red line from her elbow to her wrist. It had bled a great deal, staining her dress, but it was not deep. She had washed it with the last of the water in the barrel and bound it tightly with a strip of her apron. It was a small price. The real price was sitting across from her. Koa was leaning against the opposite wall, his legs stretched out. He had not moved since Maka left. His eyes were closed, but he was not asleep. His face was pale, almost gray beneath its copper color, and it was slick with a cold sweat. The pain was coming back, the fire she had cut out of him replaced by a new, throbbing agony from the fight. He had used the last of his strength to protect her, and now he was paying for it. The light inside the cabin was dim, a deep, bruised purple. She watched his chest. His breathing was shallow, too fast, each inhalation hitched, caught on a snag of pain. He was trying not to make a sound. He was a warrior, and he would not show weakness. Clara pushed herself to her feet, her own body a collection of aches. She found the pot of herbs Maka had given her. It was still warm. She poured the last of the green, sharp-smelling liquid into a cup. She knelt in front of him. "You must drink this," she said, her voice quiet. He opened his eyes. They were dark, clouded with pain. He did not seem to see her. He was somewhere else, trapped inside the torment of his own body. "Koa," she said, her voice firmer. She touched his good shoulder. "Drink." He focused on her. He nodded. A short, jerky movement. He tried to reach for the cup, but his hand was shaking too badly. She put her arm behind his back, her hand on his good shoulder, and helped him lean forward. She held the tin cup to his lips. He drank, his throat working. He was breathing hard through his nose, his entire body rigid. When the cup was empty, she eased him back against the wall. "The bandage," she said. "The one on your leg. I must change it. The poultice." "No," he breathed, the word a gasp. "It is good." "It is not," she said. "It is full of dirt and blood from the fight. It will get poisoned again." She did not wait for his permission. She found the last clean strips of cloth she owned, the very last of her linen. She soaked them in the remaining herbal water. She knelt by his leg. He watched her. His jaws set so tight the muscles in his neck stood out like cords. She unwrapped the binding. The poultice was a dark, caked mess. The wound beneath it was raw, red, but clean. Her cutting had been true, but it was inflamed, angry from the violent movement of the battle. She cleaned it as gently as she could, her touch light, but every brush of the cloth made his body flinch. He was a tightly wound spring, vibrating with a pain he refused to name. His breathing grew harsher, faster, a dry, rasping sound in the dark room. He was losing. She saw the tremor start in his hands. She saw the sweat break out anew on his forehead. He was at his limit. She finished cleaning it. She laid the new, clean bandage over the wound. He cried out, a low, strangled sound that was torn from his throat before he could stop it. His body arched, his hands clawing into fists. Clara looked at his face, at the pure, unshielded agony. He was fighting to pull it back inside, to hide it. She put her hand on his chest, feeling the frantic hammer of his heart. She leaned in close, her voice a fierce, desperate whisper, a command to help him. "Bury yourself deeper," she pleaded. deeper into the stillness, deeper into the earth, where the pain could not find him. Hide, hide it. His eyes flew open. They were black, no longer clouded, but burning with a sudden, shocking clarity. He saw her. He misunderstood her, or perhaps he understood her in a way she had not intended. He was not a man who was buried. He was a man who acted. His good arms shot out. He grabbed her by the shoulders, his grip like an iron trap. He pulled her down, off her knees, onto him. He pulled her against his chest, his one arm wrapping around her back, crushing her to him. She cried out, surprised, her own wounded arm trapped between them. The pain was a bright, white flash. He held her. He buried his face in her neck, in her hair, which was matted with dust and soot. He was shaking, his body trembling with the force of his pain, and with something else, something new. She could feel his heart hammering against her ribs. She could smell the sweat, the dust, the clean, sharp scent of the herbs, and the faint, coppery smell of his blood. He was all heat, pain, and strength. She stopped fighting. She was pressed against him, her face against his shoulder. Her own pain, her own fear was nothing. She was a shield. She was an anchor. She wrapped her good arm around him, holding him as he held her. He let out his breath, a long, shuddering sigh that was half a sob, half a release. As deep as forever allows, he breathed, the words muffled against her skin. It was not a promise. It was a vow. It was his answer. He would not bury himself to hide from the world. He would bury himself in her. They stayed that way for a long time. The cabin was dark. The wind moaned. They were two people, alive, in a world that wanted them dead. They were no longer white and Comanche. They were no longer rescuers and victims, nurses and patients. They were partners. They had bled together. They had moved from a debt of honor to a choice. They belonged to no side, to no people, except to the truth, and to each other. Slowly, the trembling in his body subsided. His breathing eased, deepening. His grip on her loosened, becoming not a desperate clutch, but a new, protective hold. A shadow fell across them. Clara looked up. Maka was standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the last, fading purple of the twilight. He had made no sound. He looked at them, at Clara lying in Koa's embrace, her head on his shoulder, their arms around each other. Clara's face flushed. She made a move to pull away, to explain, to find the old boundaries. Koa's arm tightened, holding her fast. He would not let her go. He would not let her be shamed. He met Maka's gaze over the top of her head, his own eyes clear and defiant. Maka's expression did not change. His face was stone. He looked at them, at their tangled, wounded bodies, at the shared space they occupied. He did not see a white woman and a Comanche. He did not see a breach of custom. He saw two warriors who had survived a fight. He saw a bond that had been forged in gunfire. He cared for character, not for ceremony. He gave a single, slow nod. He understood. "It is time," Maka said, his voice a low rumble. "The moon is dark." He stepped inside. The decision was made. "The preacher," Koa said, his voice still rough. "At the settlement, he is weak, but he has the other paper, the white man's paper. He must see the iron." "He will be watched," Maka said. "Tucker is not a fool. He will have men at the settlement." "We will not go by the main trail," Clara said, finding her voice. She pulled herself up, sitting beside Koa, not leaving his side. "There is a path through the stone canyon. It is narrow. It comes up behind the church. I used to gather herbs there." Maka looked at her. "You will lead." "I will," she said. "Tucker's men," Maka said, his eyes hard, "will be looking for us, but Tucker is wounded. He will be slow, but he will send word. He will send word to the fort. That warrant the one he brings will be from a marshal. It will be real. We have until the sun." The new threat,
Not a mob, but the cold, organized violence of the law, a legal lynching. Maka turned and left them. Be ready in 1 hour. 1 hour. Clara stood up, her body aching. 1 hour to leave the only life she had known. Koa watched her as she moved through the ruined cabin. She went to the stove. The fire was almost out. She opened the small, iron box where she kept her few important things. There were letters from her mother, in Ireland. The paper thin and covered in faded brown ink. There was her marriage certificate, Liam's name signed next to hers. There was a daguerreotype of her parents, stiff and formal. These were her ghosts. This was her past. She looked at them for a long, silent moment. Then, one by one, she fed them to the dying embers. The paper curled, flared bright, and turned to black. Floating ash. She was cutting the ropes. She was unmooring herself. Koa understood. He pushed himself up, hissing in pain, and limped to where she stood. He was holding something. It was a thong of dark leather. On it was a single, smooth red stone, the color of the canyon walls, and a small, pointed piece of bone, carved with fine lines. He did not speak. He reached out and, his rough, trembling fingers brushing her neck, he tied it around her. The stone was cool against her skin, a sudden, solid weight. It was not a gift, it was a promise, it was a new belonging. Clara's last act was not for herself. She took her one remaining bucket and walked out into the darkness, to the spring. Her arm ached, but she did not care. She filled the bucket. She brought it back. She went to the big water barrel on the porch, the one the bullets had miraculously missed. She filled it to the very brim. She hung the clean tin dipper on the nail beside it. It was an act of hope. It was her stubborn, unyielding morality. She was leaving, but she would not poison the well. She would not let the land be as cruel as the men who fought over it. Whoever came to this place next, friend or foe, they would find water. They would find the first, most basic gift of life. She turned to go inside, and the clearing was full of shadows. The Comanche had gathered. They had no fires. They were just dark shapes, their ponies waiting. They had Clara's mare, which had been safe in the lean-to behind the cabin. Maka was at their head, on his pony. One of the warriors helped Clara onto her mare. Koa pulled himself onto his own pony, his face a tight mask of pain, but his back was straight. He met her eyes in the darkness. Maka raised his hand. He moved his pony forward, into the narrow, dark cut of the stone canyon. The warriors fell in behind him, a silent, single file of ghosts. Clara fell in line, her mare following the horse in front of her. Koa was right behind her, his pony's breath warm on her back. She did not look back. She did not look at the dark, shattered shape of her home, a place of memory, a place of violence. She kept her eyes forward, on the dark rider in front of her, and on the narrow, unknown path through the rock. The stone canyon was a wound in the earth, and they were the blood moving through it. The path was narrow, barely wide enough for a single horse. Clara's shod mare made a sharp, clicking sound, a dangerous noise in the absolute dark. But the unshod ponies of the Comanche were silent, moving like shadows over the rock. Clara led them. She knew this path, but she had only ever traveled it in daylight. Now, with the moon a hidden sliver, she rode by memory, her good hand on the reins, her wounded arm throbbing with a dull, heavy ache. Behind her, she could hear Koa. He was not making a sound, but she could hear his breathing. It was a faint, controlled rasp, the sound of a man holding a universe of pain inside himself. The ride was tearing at his newly healed wound. Every jolt of the pony was a fresh agony, but he rode with his back straight. Maka and his warriors were a silent, protective envelope. 2 were ahead of her, scouts moving on foot, and the rest were behind Koa. They were a tribe, a family, moving with a single purpose. They rode for hours.
The cold of the deep night settled into their bones. When they finally emerged from the canyon, the sky to the east was not black, but a deep, sick purple. Dawn was coming. The race was almost over. The settlement was quiet. It was not a town, just a scatter of dark, sleeping shapes. The path Clara had chosen brought them up behind the one building that had a cross on its roof. The chapel. It was small, made of warped lumber, and it looked more like a shed than a house of God. Maka raised his hand. The party stopped. He dismounted, and two of his warriors fanned out, vanishing into the gray shadows. They were the sentries. Koa slid from his pony. He did not fall, but it was close. He leaned against the horse for a long moment, his head down, his body trembling. Clara dismounted and went to him. "Can you walk?" "I will walk," he breathed. He put his good arm over her shoulder. She took his weight. Together, with Maka walking silently beside them. They moved to the small door at the back of the chapel. Maka knocked. It was not a polite rap. It was 3 hard, flat sounds. They waited. A full minute passed. A light appeared inside, a flicker of yellow. A bolt was drawn, a sound that was far too loud in the stillness. The door opened a crack. A man peered out. He was thin, wearing a nightshirt, his hairless head shining in the lamplight. It was Reverend Gideon. His eyes went wide. He saw Clara, then he saw Koa, then his gaze lifted, and he saw Maka, standing like a carved idol in the gray light. The Reverend tried to slam the door. Maka's hand shot out, flat, and held it open. "No," Gideon whispered, his voice shaking so hard it barely worked. "No, you cannot be here." "Reverend," Clara said, her voice urgent. "He is the man, Koa. He has the proof. He needs you to speak. You promised." "I cannot," Gideon stammered, his eyes darting wildly over their shoulders. "He was here. Tucker. He was here last night. He told me, he said if I spoke, he would burn the chapel. He said he would tell the town I was a sympathizer. They will kill me." He was going to break. He was a weak man, and the threat had been too much. "He has no honor," Koa said, his voice a low, pained rumble. "But you spoke of God. You spoke of truth." "Truth does not stop a bullet," Gideon hissed. "He is coming back. He is bringing a marshal. It is legal." "That is why you must speak," Clara pleaded. "Get out," Gideon shrieked, his voice cracking. "Get out before he finds you here." "He already has." The new voice was not Gideon's. It was Tucker. He was standing at the front door of the chapel, which he had just kicked open. The rising sun was behind him, framing him in a halo of blinding, golden light. His right arm was in a crude sling, his shirt dark with old blood, but his face was a mask of pure, triumphant hatred. He was not alone. 4 of his hardest men, the ones who had not run, were behind him, and beside him, standing uncomfortable in the doorway, was a new man. He was tall, thin, and wore a dusty suit and a clean, silver star, a deputy marshal. "There they are," Tucker snarled, his voice thick. "Just like I told you, Deputy Finch, the murderer and the traitor, hiding in a church." Deputy Finch looked uneasy. He was a man of paper, not of war. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dry. I have a warrant for a Comanche known as Koa, for the murders of 2 men at Dry Creek, and for robbery." "He is lying," Clara said, her voice ringing in the small, empty chapel. "He is the murderer. He drove those men off. He is stealing their land." Tucker laughed, a short, barking sound. "Hear that, Finch? She is crazy. Been living with him. He is a robber. We caught him, and he killed 2 of my men. And she," he pointed at Clara with his good hand, "she harbored him. She is an accomplice." "Ma'am," I have to ask you to step aside, Finch said, his hand moving to his pistol. We are taking him in. No. The voice came from the back door. Maka stepped into the chapel. He was not alone. The 2 warriors he had sent as scouts, and 2 more, followed him. They were silent, armed with rifles, and they fanned out, filling the small room with an unmovable, ancient authority. The chapel was suddenly very, very small. Deputy Finch froze. His hand stopped, halfway to his gun. He was trapped. In front of him were Tucker and his 4 men. Behind him were Maka and his 4 warriors. In the middle were Clara and a wounded Comanche. This was not in his law books. "This is not your fight, Indian," Tucker snarled at Maka. "You are on our land," Maka said, his voice flat. It was a statement that rewrote the entire warrant. "He lies about murder," Koa said. He was still leaning on Clara, but his voice was clear. He reached into his belt and pulled out the leather pouch. "He hunts me for this." He threw the heavy piece of iron onto the floor. It landed with a dull, metallic thud between them. "What is that?" Finch asked, staring at it. "Junk," Tucker spat. "Savage trash." "It is a map," Clara said, her voice clear and strong. "An old Spanish landmarker. It shows the boundaries of the land he is trying to steal. The Miller Ranch, the Jensen claim. It proves he is the thief." The noise of the confrontation had done its work. People were stirring. Faces appeared in the shattered front door of the chapel. Silas, the blacksmith's son, the storekeeper, other farmers. They had come to see the arrest, the end of the Comanche threat. Now they were witnesses. Reverend Gideon had been trembling, flattened against the wall, a leaf in a storm. He looked at Koa. He looked at the iron map. He looked at Maka, whose gaze was fixed on him, demanding. And he looked at the faces of his congregation, his people, peering in from the doorway, waiting for the truth. He found his spine. "He is not lying," Gideon said, his voice shaking but finding its pitch. Tucker spun on him. "You shut your mouth, preacher, or I will shut it for you." "No," Gideon shouted, taking a step forward. "No more. You came to me. You threatened to burn this holy place. You threatened me." Gideon fumbled inside his nightshirt and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "And this came from your railroad agent, the one you have been meeting with in secret." The crowd in the doorway pushed forward. "Listening." "He writes," Gideon said, his finger tracing the line. "We are prepared to purchase the parcels at the agreed price, once they are cleared and consolidated." He called it clatuckering. He promised a bonus for a quick resolution. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. "Cleared," one of the farmers said. "That is what he told the Millers, that they had to clear out for their safety." "My father," Silas shouted, his voice cracking. "He told me Tucker made him shoe his horses for free. He threatened him. He said he would brand him as an Indian lover if he refused." The narrative was crumbling. The settlers, the ones who had been so sure, so righteous, now looked at each other. They had been used. Their fear had been a tool for Tucker's greed. But Tucker's men gripped their rifles. "It is a trick," one of them yelled. "Do not listen to them. It is a savage and his whore." Tucker saw it. He saw his power, his profit, his entire world dissolving. He was ruined. He was a cornered animal. He looked at Finch's pistol. In his rage, he forgot his broken arm. He lunged, his left hand snatching the pistol from the deputy's holster. "He is a prisoner," Tucker screamed, his face purple. "I am taking him." He was clumsy. He was not aiming at Koa. He swung the gun toward Clara. She was the one who had stopped him. She was the root of this. He fired. The chapel exploded with the sound. Clara did not have time to scream. Koa moved. He was not a wounded man. He was a warrior. He threw himself in front of her, shoving her back. He took the bullet. It was not a clean hit.
The wild shot tore through the flesh of his side, a long, burning graze, but it did not stop him. He grunted, a sharp exhalation of pain, but he did not fall. Before Tucker could pull the trigger a second time, before Deputy Finch could even react, Mecca moved. He crossed the room in one silent, fluid step. He did not grab the gun. He grabbed Tucker's left wrist. There was a sound, a sharp, wet snap, the sound of bone breaking. Tucker screamed, a high, thin wail of pure agony. The pistol clattered to the wooden floor. Mecca did not stop. He hit Tucker once, an open-handed strike across the face. It was not a punch. It was a judgment. It sent Tucker crashing backward into the small, rough wooden altar, which splintered under his weight. Silence. Absolute, breathless silence. Koa was leaning against Clara, his hand pressed to his new wound, blood seeping through his fingers. Maka stood over Tucker, who was whimpering on the floor, his good arm now shattered. Everyone in the room, and in the doorway, turned and looked at one man. Deputy Marshal Finch. He was the law. Finch was shaking, his face the color of ash. He looked at Maka, an unmovable force of nature. He looked at Tucker, a broken, whining criminal. He looked at the iron map on the floor, and he looked at the crowd, at the dozens of eyes, angry, confused, and demanding. His fake, bought law had just been confronted by real, hard truth, and the public was watching. He took a deep breath. His hand, shaking, pulled a pair of iron handcuffs from his belt. "Tucker," he said, his voice a dry crackle, "you are under arrest for assault on a federal officer, for conspiracy to defraud, for murder." He hauled Tucker to his feet. Tucker did not resist. He was broken, his eyes empty of everything but a deep, bottomless hate. The truth had won. To him and his men, who now looked thoroughly bewildered, dragged Tucker out of the chapel. The crowd parted to let them pass. Clara let out the breath she had been holding for 3 days. She felt Koa's weight sag against her. He was hurt, again. Maka looked at them. The victory was real. The iron map was safe. The witness had spoken. The villain was in chains. But as Clara looked around the chapel, at the faces of her neighbors, she saw that the battle was not over. Some looked at her with a new respect, but others looked at her with the same cold suspicion. They looked at Maka, at his warriors, and the fear was still there. The truth had won, for a moment, but the hatred was old and deep. This victory had not been won by the law. It had been won by the courage of a weak man, the endurance of a wounded one, and the unbreakable honor of a savage. They did not stay in the settlement. The chapel, with its splintered altar and the accusing stares of the townsfolk, was no longer a sanctuary. It was a courtroom, and Clara had already been judged. Maka led the way, his face an unreadable mask of stone. He did not lead them back to the smoking ruin of her cabin. He led them west, toward the high, dark line of the mountains that separated the territory from the unknown. They stopped just at the edge of the town's influence, in a small grove of tall pine trees. The air here was sharp, smelling of resin and damp earth, a world away from the dust and gunpowder of the settlement below. Koa slid from his pony. He did not fall, but he staggered. His hand pressed tight to his side. The bullet graze was long and ugly, a raw, red trough that was already weeping blood. He sank to the ground, his back against the rough bark of a pine, his face pale and slick with a cold sweat. Clara dismounted her own mare, which one of Maka's men had retrieved. Blowing nervously, she looked at Koa, and the exhaustion of the past 2 days settled on her like a physical weight. Her own arm throbbed, a dull, nagging reminder of the fight. And then the sky broke. It was not a storm. It was a miracle. A low, gray cloud that had been building for 2 days finally yielded. A drop of water hit her dusty hand. Then another. Then a soft, steady, vertical rain began to fall. It was the first rain in 3 months. It hissed softly on the dry ground, turning the dust to dark mud. It was a cool, clean blessing. Clara tilted her head back, letting the water run over her face, washing away the soot from the cabin and the fine, gritty powder of the battle. It was a baptism. She turned to Koa. The rain was washing the blood from his side, making the wound look stark and terrible.
"I must,"
she said, her voice rough.
"I have to stitch it."
He nodded, his jaw tight. She looked at her hands. She had nothing. Her medical supplies, the whiskey, the linen, were all gone, all burned or used. She fumbled in the pocket of her apron, the one she had not changed in 2 days. Her fingers closed on a small, familiar object, a small tin case, her sewing kit. It held a spool of black thread and 2 sharp needles. It was meant for mending shirts, not men. She knelt in front of him.
"This is all I have?"
"It is enough," he breathed. Maka and his warriors stood at a distance, a silent, watchful circle. They did not interfere. This was her work. She took the needle. She pulled a long strand of thread. She looked at the boiling pot she did not have.
"Fire,"
she whispered. Koa did not move. He just watched her. One of Maka's men, the young, angry one, stepped forward. He held out a small, burning coal he had kept alive in a ball of dry moss. He touched it to the tip of her needle. The metal hissed and glowed red for a second. Clean. Clara took a deep breath. The rain was cold on her back.
"Hold still,"
she said. She began to sew. She pushed the needle through his skin. It was tough, resistant. He did not flinch. He did not hiss. He did not even close his eyes. He just watched her face. He watched her as she focused, her brow furrowed, her tongue caught between her teeth. He watched her pull the thread tight, her movements economical. Sure. The rain fell around them, a soft, gray curtain, enclosing them in a world of their own. It was a different kind of intimacy from the one in the cellar. That had been darkness and fever and a desperate shared heat. This was cold and clear and methodical. It was the quiet, practical work of putting a life back together. When she was finished, she tied off the thread and bit it with her teeth. She had made a dozen small, black stitches. They were neat. They would hold. She sat back on her heels, exhausted. Maka walked toward them, the rain dripping from his long braids. He stopped and looked down, first at her work, then at her face. He sat cross-legged on the wet ground opposite them. "You have a strong hand," he said, his voice a low rumble.
"It is just a needle,"
Clara said, her voice trembling.
"No,"
Maka said. He looked at her, his gaze intense. "You stood in the cabin. You fought. You stood in the chapel. You spoke. You did not fight for your own blood. You did not fight for your own people. You fought for him." He nodded at Koa. "And you fought for the truth. You fight like one of the people. Not for blood. For what is right." It was the highest praise he could give. It was an acceptance. It meant she was no longer the white widow. She was, in his eyes, a person of honor. Clara looked down at her hands, stained with his blood, and her own. "I just wanted the killing to stop." "Sometimes," Maka said, "to stop a killing, you must be the one who fights." A sound from the trail below made them all look up. A single rider, coming from the settlement. He was riding slowly, his head down against the rain. Maka's warriors tensed, their hands moving to their weapons.
"No,"
Clara said, her hand rising.
"I know him.
He is not a fighter." It was Silas, the blacksmith's son. He rode up, his thin shoulders hunched. He stopped his horse 20 yards away, his eyes wide with fear of the Comanche warriors. "Mistress McKee," he called out, his voice thin in the rain.
"I am here, Silas."
He dismounted, holding the reins of his horse tightly.
He was carrying a heavy burlap sack. "I came to—" He swallowed, his gaze darting from Maka to Koa and back. "My father, he sent this." He walked forward, carefully, and set the sack on the ground between them. "He said to thank you," Silas stammered, not meeting her eyes. "For what you did, for the truth. The Millers are coming back. The widow Jensen, too. They are talking to the marshal. They are saying what really happened." "And Tucker?" Clara asked, her voice quiet. "He is gone," Silas said. "The marshal took him. Him and the 4 men who stayed with him. He was screaming, cursing you. He said you were a—" He flushed. "He said you were a traitor." "And what do you say?" Clara asked. Silas finally looked at her. His eyes were full of a miserable, youthful shame. "I say I was a coward. I was there, with Tucker, that first day. I did nothing." "You are here now," Koa said, his voice quiet. Silas looked at him, startled. "The town is divided," he said, the words rushing out. "Some are like my father. They are saying you saved us, that Tucker was a thief, and you stopped him." He looked down. "But others are saying what Tucker said. They are afraid of—" He gestured toward Maka. "They are saying you chose them, over us, that you are no longer one of us." The social fallout, the line drawn. She was an outcast. "The railroad men are still there," Silas said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The ones from the company. They are in the saloon. They are not talking. They are just waiting, drinking. My father said Tucker is gone, but the money is still there. He said this is not over." This was the truth. They had won the battle. They had cut off the snake's head. But the body of the snake, the railroad, the money, the greed, was still moving. It would just find a new man to wear a star. "You should not come back, ma'am," Silas said, his voice full of a genuine, sad concern. "It is not safe for you. Not anymore." He backed away, mounted his horse, and rode back down the trail, disappearing into the gray, cleansing rain. Clara looked at the sack. She opened it. Inside was a fresh loaf of bread, a large wedge of cheese, a full twist of salt, and a bottle of whiskey, unopened. A gift of gratitude, a farewell present. She looked back at the settlement, a dark smudge in the rain. She thought of her cabin, of the ruined walls. She thought of Liam's grave. She had lost it all. Her home, her community, her herd. She began to shake. A cold, deep tremor that had nothing to do with the rain. "He was right," she whispered, the tears finally coming, mixing with the rain on her face. "They will never let me back. I have no home. I have no people. I have nothing." Koa watched her. He waited for the storm of her grief to pass. When her shoulders stopped shaking, he reached out. He did not touch her wounded arm. He took her other hand, the one that was stained and raw from the sewing. His hand was warm, his grip surprisingly strong. "You have a home," he said, his voice low. "If you choose it." She looked at him, her vision blurred. "What are you—" "Come with us," he said, "to the valley, where my people live. Come for 1 season." He saw the fear in her eyes, the fear of a new cage. "It is not a prison," he said, his voice fierce. "You are not a captive. You are Clara. You are honored. See our ways. If it is not right for you, you can still choose. You can always choose." He was not offering her protection. He was not offering her a new master. He was offering her what she had lost. A choice. Freedom. Clara looked down at their joined hands, his dark, wounded hand, and her pale, stained one. She looked at the red stone and the carved bone on the necklace he had given her. It felt heavy on her chest, a new anchor. She was not being pulled. She was not being rescued. She was making a choice. She was taking a step. She tightened her grip on his hand. "1 season," she said. A faint smile, the first she had ever seen, touched his lips. Maka, who had been sitting, listening to it all, Stood up, he nodded. Once, the decision was made.
It is good, he said. The path is long, and the long road is a good teacher. He turned and gave a low command in his own language. The warriors, who had been resting, moved with a silent, fluid purpose. They mounted their ponies. One of them brought Clara's mare, and another brought Koa's. Koa used Clara's shoulder to pull himself to his feet. He was weak, in pain, but he was standing. He would ride. Clara mounted her mare. She looked back. One last time. At the settlement. It was already small, distant, a life that was over. As if to mark the end, the faint, tinny sound of the church bell came up through the rain. Reverend Gideon, his hands shaking, was ringing it for the morning service. It sounded like a bell tolling for a funeral for the life she had known. Maka raised his hand and pointed west, toward the mountains. He kicked his pony, and the small, brave group moved out, climbing the trail into the high, unknown country. Clara rode beside Koa, and she did not look back again. The journey west was a trial. For 2 days, they rode into the high country, leaving the settlements and the scarred land behind. Koa rode with his back straight, but Clara could see the cost. She saw the way his hand gripped the mane of his pony, his knuckles white. She saw the sheen of cold sweat on his face. Even in the cool mountain air, he was burning his life's fuel to keep moving. Clara rode beside him, her own arm a dull, throbbing ache, the red stone on her neck a constant, solid reminder. She was tired, but she was not broken. She was moving. For the first time since Liam's death, she was not reacting. She was choosing. Maka led them, his knowledge of the land a living thing. He found paths that were not paths, water and rocks that looked dry. On the third morning, they came to a place that looked like a dead end, a solid wall of sheer red rock, 1,000 feet high. Maka dismounted. He led his pony into a crack in the wall, a fissure so narrow it seemed impossible. "We walk," he said. They dismounted and led their horses, one by one, into the earth. The canyon was dark, and so narrow their shoulders brushed the stone on either side. It was a tight, suffocating passage. And then it opened. Clara stepped out of the rock and her breath caught. The opening scene of her old life had been a world of white sun, choking dust, and heat. This was a promise. It was a high mountain valley, a perfect green bowl hidden from the world by the wall of red rock. Tall pines, the kind she had only seen from a distance, grew thick, their branches hushing the wind. The air was cool, and it smelled of pine resin and wet earth. And through the center of it all, a miracle, a wide, clear stream, chuckling over gray stones. It was not a trickle. It was not a dry bed. It was a river of life. The contrast with her cabin, with the dry, cracked land that had demanded so much and given so little, was so profound that tears pricked her eyes. At the far end of the valley, sheltered by a grove of cottonwoods, was the village. It was not the collection of crude, temporary lodges she had imagined. It was a real place. There were perhaps 30 teepees, their smoked hides painted with figures of horses and stars. Small, disciplined plumes of smoke rose from a few of them. Children, their bodies sleek and brown, were playing in the shallows of the stream. They were not shouting. They were laughing, their voices like the splash of the water itself. An old woman, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles, sat in the sun, her hands busy, braiding a long, bright yellow rope of sinew. This was not a war camp. This was a home. It was the life they fought to protect. As they rode in, the village came to a respectful quiet. The children stopped playing and watched, their dark eyes wide, curious, and unafraid. They were looking at her. Maka led them to the center of the camp. He dismounted, and the old, angry warrior who had first brought the news to Clara came and took his pony. Maka spoke to him. his voice low. The warrior looked at Koa, and his face was no longer angry. It was filled with a deep, profound relief. He came and helped Koa from his horse. Koa was unsteady, his legs buckling, but the warrior held him. A quiet, somber procession was forming at the edge of the camp. They were carrying 2 long bundles, wrapped in buffalo robes. Maka turned to Koa, and then to Clara. "We honor our dead," he said, his English simple for her. "The 2 men who fell at your cabin." The procession moved to a small, clear space beneath the largest pines. A hole had been dug. The 2 warriors were laid to rest. There was no wailing. There was no grand speech. Maka stood over the graves and spoke, his voice quiet. In his own language, he spoke of their bravery. He spoke of the truth they had died for. Clara watched, her heart aching. These men had died for her choice. She remembered her own ritual, her religion of water. She still had the water skin she had filled at her spring, the spring that was no longer hers. It was slung over her saddle. She walked to her mare, unhooked it, and brought it back. The people watched her, curious. Maka paused, his hand full of earth, and looked at her. Clara knelt by the fresh grave. She opened the skin. "In my home," she whispered, her voice thick. "We give water to the journey." She poured the water onto the fresh earth. A dark stain, a final, shared blessing. It was the last of her old life, given freely to her new one. Maka watched the water soak in. He nodded. He understood. He threw his own handful of earth onto the grave. "It is good," he said. Later, when the rites were done, Koa found her. He was leaning heavily on the young warrior, but he was clean. His wounds had been dressed by the women. With new, fresh herbs, he was sitting by a small, smokeless fire, and he beckoned her over. He was holding something. It was a knife, in a sheath of beaded hide. It was not his, this was smaller, the handle made of smooth, white bone. "This was my mother's," he said, his voice stronger in the cool air. He held it out to her. "Handle first. It is not to kill." Clara took it. The bone was warm, and it fit her hand perfectly. "It is to work," he said, "to cut skin, to make food, to live." He looked at her, his eyes clear and steady. "It is for you. You are not defenseless. You are your own." It was the ultimate gift of trust. He was not just giving her a tool. He was giving her power. He was acknowledging her as his equal, an autonomous person, not a thing he had rescued. Maka came to them, his shadow falling long in the late afternoon light. He pointed to a lodge, set a little apart. Near the stream. It was well made, the hides clean. "That teepee," he said, "it belongs to a man who hunts far away. He returns with the snow. Today it is yours." He was not ordering her. He was not assigning her. He was offering a place in the circle. Clara looked at the lodge. It was a real home. "Thank you," she whispered. Life in the valley was a different rhythm. It was measured by the sun and the needs of the day. For the first few days, Clara was an object of intense, quiet curiosity. The children followed her, silent, watchful. The women nodded, their eyes appraising her. Her arm healed, the red line fading to a pale scar. Koa's wounds healed, too. The stitches she had made held. He was walking, slowly at first. Then with his old, fluid grace, the limp was gone. She sat by the stream, watching the children. She took a stick and, in the damp earth, she drew a letter, an A. A small, brave girl, perhaps 6 years old, came closer. She pointed at the mark. Clara said the sound, "Ah." The girl repeated it, "Ah." Clara drew a B. "Buh, buh," the girl repeated. Soon, there were 5 children, all crowded around, their dark heads bent, watching her make the strange, powerful marks. That evening, The old woman Clara had first seen, the one who braided sinew, came to her lodge. She sat without a word. She held out a hank of dried, tough animal tendon and a sharp bone awl. Clara watched. The old woman's hands, gnarled and dark, moved with a speed and precision that was beautiful. She split the sinew. She braided it. She waxed it with pine pitch. Then she held it out to Clara. Clara took it. Her own hands, pale and clumsy, tried to mimic the movements. She failed. The sinew tangled. The old woman did not laugh. She just, wordlessly, took Clara's hands in her own and guided her fingers, showing her the tension, the twist. It was an exchange, reading for braiding, a new, equal language. A week passed. The moon grew. Koa was healed. He was no longer a patient. He was a warrior again. He was himself. He found her by the stream, where she was practicing her braiding. He sat beside her. He was holding the piece of iron, the map. "The preacher is silent," he said. He had spoken to the scouts who had ranged far, gathering news. "He has been sent away. Marshal Finch is a good man, but his bosses are not." "The railroad," Clara said. It was not a question. "The railroad," he confirmed. "They will not stop. Tucker is in jail, but the company will find another Tucker. They will take the land. The Millers will be pushed out again, legally." "So," Clara said, her heart heavy, "we failed. It was all for nothing." "No," he said, his voice fierce. He touched the iron map. "We did not fail. We have the truth. What good is it if no one will listen?" "They will listen," he said. He looked at her, his eyes full of a new plan, a new fight. Not the judges, not the men with stars, the people, the farmers, the ones they are cheating on. "We will ride," he said. "Not as a war party, as witnesses. You and I. We will go to the Miller Ranch. We will show them this. We will tell them the truth. We will go to the widow Jensen. We will go to all of them. We will spread the truth like fire. They cannot stop all of us. They cannot lie to everyone." It was a new kind of war, not with bullets, but with truth. Not to take, but to protect. Clara looked at him, at the passion in his face, at the simple, brave honor of it. "When do we leave?" she asked. That evening, the air was cool, the sky a deep, star-filled purple. Clara went to the stream to fill a water skin. The sound of the running water was a constant, peaceful music. She knelt by the bank, dipping the skin into the cold, clear current. She did not hear him. He moved like a part of the landscape. She only knew he was there when his arms wrapped around her from behind. She stiffened, a lifetime of defense making her ready to fight. "It is me," he whispered, his voice low, his breath warm on her neck. He did not grab her. He held her. His arms were strong, wrapped around her waist, pulling her back gently against his chest. His chin came to rest on her shoulder. Clara let out the breath she was holding. She relaxed, leaning back into him. His heart was a steady, slow beat against her back. They stood there for a long time, in the quiet, listening to the water. They did not speak. They did not need to. This was not the desperate, frantic clinch in the cellar. This was not the pained embrace in the ruined cabin. This was something new. It was quiet. It was steady. It was a love that had been earned, not just declared. It was a love that did not need to ask permission from any nation, any law, or any god. It simply was a place of freedom, she thought, was not a place without rules. It was not a place without pain, or without cost. It was a place where a person had the courage to choose what was right. And in that place, she had learned. Love was not a word. It was an action. It was pulling a man from a dry ditch. It was cutting out the poison. It was standing in a ruined house and fighting for his life. It was sewing a wound closed in the rain. It was, she thought,
as his arms tightened around her. Simply the act of staying. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly appreciate you spending your time with me here. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below and let us all connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales, and give this video a like. And if you would like to give an extra measure of support, please hit the hype button. It truly helps get this story heard by more people.